Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel titled Nowhere to Hide, Accountability to Fight Global Ransomware. My name is Giacomo Persipaoli. I'm the head of the Security and Technology Program at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. So welcome, whether you're joining us here in person in Oslo or online. We really look forward to engaging with you throughout this event. If you're following us here in the room, please be mindful that you have to wear your headset, and we are actually broadcasting on channel 5 for this meeting. Over the course of the panel, there will be the opportunity for you to engage with our expert speakers and ask questions. If you are here in the room, you will see microphones at the periphery of the seating area. And if you are online, please do submit your questions in the chat. We have a dedicated moderator that will be passing them on to me, and then I will extend them to our expert speakers. So why ransomware? Well, ransomware has emerged as an urgent global challenge, with attacks growing by nearly 300% last year alone. Now, ransomware in itself isn't new. So the question comes, how is it possible that despite the fact that we all know what ransomware is, it's still having such a devastating impact on cybersecurity? How come that these percentages keep growing? And that's probably a combination of different factors. On one side, there is definitely the technology factor. The technology factor that is making these ransomware campaigns more complex, more sophisticated, more difficult to detect, quicker to deploy at scale. There is also another evolution of the threat landscape, which is the emergence of commercial off-the-shelf ransomware tools or cybercrime as a service that has really broadened the base and lowered the barriers for cyber criminals that are willing to engage in this malicious behavior. So on one side, we have definitely the threat that is continuously evolving and becoming increasingly complex. And on the other side, we probably have a systemic failure to find the right countermeasures to mitigate this threat. And these countermeasures start from basic cyber hygiene of individuals, and they escalate up to organizational and governmental and intergovernmental responses. So through the panel today, we're really hoping to get different perspectives from speakers that are representatives of different stakeholder communities that can really help us understand better not only how is the threat evolving, but also what can we do to monitor, to detect, and to respond to such ubiquitous threat as is ransomware. So I'm very happy to be joined by great speakers today. I will introduce them. They're both here in the room and joining us online. Starting here on my immediate left, Brendan Dowling, the Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology of Australia. On his left, Francesca Bosco, Chief Strategy Officer at the Cyber Peace Institute. Further down the table, we have Chelsea Smethurst, Director for Cyber Policy and Diplomacy at Microsoft. And joining us online, I hope, Julia, you can hear me, it's Julia Rodriguez Acosta, Minister Counselor for the Permanent Mission of El Salvador to the United Nations. So we will give each speaker an opportunity to share some of their initial remarks, and then we have structured this panel through a series of questions and answers. At any point, please do feel free to jump in. There will be hopefully a dedicated time towards the end to collect your questions, but particularly if you're following us online, do not wait until that moment to start writing them in the chat. It will make our life a lot easier if you proactively start to asking your questions. So I would like now to give the floor to Ambassador Dowling here on my left for his remarks. Please.
Thanks, Giacomo, and thanks everyone for joining us. Ransomware is the most prominent cybersecurity threat that we're facing globally. As Giacomo just went through, it is a sophisticated industry. It's not new, but it is getting more effective. There is more money being made, and there are more criminal groups taking advantage of this crime type. Importantly, the the way that the ransomware ecosystem has developed means you no longer need to be a sophisticated cyber criminal group to be able to conduct a ransomware attack. We have this service industry where you can talk to a liaison person or a broker who will connect you with the person who will conduct the initial attack on a system. There will be people who will fence the data for you, who will conduct each element of the operation for you. So it is now an accessible crime type. And for most ransomware groups, they will just take 20% of the profit from the attack that you conduct. So it's become democratized, industrialized, and it is ubiquitous. What we're seeing, what we're worried about, is that ransomware groups seem to be targeting the more smaller, more vulnerable parts of our society. They've realised that attacking large infrastructure, like with the Colonial Pipeline attack, is bad for business. It's actually more effective to conduct a high volume of attack, even if you're extracting a lower value ransom. What we're seeing at the moment in Pacific Islands, some countries with populations fewer than 100,000 people are being targeted by cybercrime groups operating out of Russia. Last week, the National Health Information Service in Tonga was shut down by a ransomware attack. We have deployed a team from Australia to assist them with recovery, but it's astonishing that in a country the size of Tonga, one of the most remote islands in the Pacific, is being targeted not at their government or business level, but the National Health Information Service. At the moment, in hospitals in Tonga, people are using paper and pen to deliver healthcare to their people. Nurses are struggling to process and triage patients because of this attack. So for anyone who doubts how much of a scourge this crime type is globally, that is the sort of activity that we are seeing now. In Australia, we had an attack against the Medibank private health insurance company. 10 million Australians had their sensitive health data compromised. For anyone who thinks ransomware is a technical issue, out of that incident, we saw women and families facing domestic violence from partners who weren't aware of the health treatment that their spouse or their mother or their sister had been seeking, and had to be moved to safe houses to escape violent partners or former partners. These are not cyber issues, these are not technical issues, these are whole of nation security and safety issues. What can we do about it? It's really hard. This is a crime type that didn't exist before cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency enabled the long-range launching of ransomware attacks across the globe. So that financial innovation has made finding this crime much more difficult. We need better access to crypto exchanges, to sharing intelligence amongst national jurisdictions to try and disrupt those parts of the ecosystem. This is a crime type that relies on a lot of brokers, a lot of middle operators who make this system functional. We need to get better at disrupting the entire ecosystem. In Australia, we apply financial and travel sanctions against cybercrime actors. This is an important measure, but it's a limited measure. We also engage in hard disruption of the ecosystem. Earlier this year, we fried the servers of the people who hosted the data in the ransomware attack against Medibank. But this crime type thrives because too many jurisdictions are not doing enough about it. Criminal groups are operating out of safe harbours, safe jurisdictions where there are a few legal consequences. Primarily, these groups are operating out of Russia, not solely, but we need jurisdictions to take this more seriously. That's why we've supported mechanisms like the Cybercrime Convention to try and get more national jurisdictions to cooperate and work together to combat this crime type. Finally, attacks succeed because of basic vulnerabilities. It would be excellent if cyber criminals were forced to use their most sophisticated techniques, but they can get by exploiting common or known vulnerabilities because we're not doing enough to patch, because technology companies are not making it easy enough to upgrade software and to replace end-of-life hardware. This needs to be a global response to hit all aspects of both the ecosystem in which this crime type thrives, but also how we better build up our resilience. We also need to talk about it more openly. There is a sense of shame amongst businesses or organisations or entities that no one wants to be open about this. And so I get attacked today and my neighbour gets attacked tomorrow because I didn't share the information about it. So this is a really important conversation. This crime type is getting worse. It is targeting the most vulnerable, and at the moment we are not winning.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for starting us off, like touching on many points that I'm sure will be picked up by speakers in their remarks and definitely during our Q&A. I would like now to pivot online and welcome Julia, connecting from New York. I hope you can hear me and see us okay. And Julia, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope that you can see me and listen to me okay. Greetings for the hot New York City. Today is really, really hot. Let me begin by extending my sincere appreciation to the organizers for convening these timely and important discussions. I cannot think of a better group of stakeholders to reflect on how we can collectively counter the impacts of one of the most pressing information security threats of our time. My first point is that, as it was just mentioned, cybercrime is ransomware is just not a cybercrime issue. It has effectively evolved into a national security crisis around the globe, and its consequences are tangible and personal and affects individuals like you and me. Business, hospitals, schools, local governments, they all have been targets. No one is immune. So beyond these immediate impacts, ransomware also has broader implications for international peace and security, including its potential links to the financing of weapons of mass destruction. So in this context, the United Nations continues to offer a platform to advance dialogue, promote international cooperation, and build collective responses. Notably, ransomware was not included in the first annual progress report of the Open and the Working Group that is currently addressing these issues in 2022. And as Giacomo said, ransomware is not new. So despite growing concern expressed by many delegations during that year discussions on existential threats to information security, El Salvador was among the group of countries that advocated for its inclusions. And we were pleased to see ransomware formally acknowledged in the second Progress Annual Report. So the ransomware attack that crippled Costa Rica's government infrastructure served as a wake-up call for many. It demonstrated how ransomware can affect not only institutions, but also states' ability to deliver essential services and maintain governance. Since then, El Salvador has consistently advocated for a strong language that addresses ransomware directly, especially as we face new threats exacerbated by other emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. As was just mentioned, AI has enhanced the sophistication of social engineering and phishing campaigns, further expanding the ransomware threat landscape. We also support language reflecting concern over the rise of ransomware as a service model that allow individuals without technical backgrounds to launch highly disruptive attacks. This evolving business model significantly lowers the barrier to entry for cyber criminals and amplifies the capabilities of more technical, sophisticated actors. The threat to critical infrastructure and its potential implications for international peace and security must not be underestimated. We also have supported advancing a more holistic view of the ransomware ecosystem, one that includes effective prosecution, disruption of technical enablers, and also breaking the financial cycle that sustained the threat. One of the favorite elements that was introduced in the recent discussion is the recognition of the importance of a human-centric approach, one that prioritizes understanding and addressing the real-world impacts of individuals and communities. So still much remains to be done, from improving international cooperation and victim support to strengthening deterrence mechanisms and also the adoption of common standards. I will stop here, but definitely I will look forward to hearing the perspective of other speakers and continue this critical conversation. And thank you so much for having me online.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing your initial remarks. We'll come back to you with a couple of questions. But now I would like to move to Francesca from the Cyber Peace Institute. We've heard already with the first two interventions how one of the main challenges about countering ransomware is actually our ability to track ransomware initiatives or campaigns and trace the various actors and their malicious actions. So Cyber Peace Institute has been working on something on this topic. So over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks a lot to the organizers and to Giacomo as moderator. It's a pleasure to contribute to the today's discussion. Allow me indeed to give a bit of context on the work of the Institute, to give also some food for thoughts for the discussion. The Cyber Peace Institute is an international non-governmental organization that is devoted to reduce the harms from cyber attacks on people's lives by assisting vulnerable communities. And we do this in a very concrete way, starting by analyzing cyber threats, hence also the participation today, and advocating for responsible behavior in cyberspace based on the evidence that we gather. At the core, what we do is indeed we conduct in-depth analysis of cyber incidents, and thanks to this knowledge, we both provide the free cybersecurity support to other civil society organizations and under-resourced organizations, and we use this knowledge to engage in international forums, also like this one, to promote a responsible behavior in cyberspace, emphasizing the human-centric approach and advocating for the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms online, and also by monitoring emerging technologies like Julie was just mentioning, artificial intelligence. Also, we anticipate how future cyber threats might impact on the threat landscape of vulnerable communities. As a tangible example of how we work and building on the excellent remarks that Giacomo, the ambassador, and Julie just mentioned on the prevalence of ransomware, giving also some concrete examples, we would like to contribute to the discussion with an ongoing project specifically focusing on ransomware, which is building on a long-standing expertise gained at the Institute. We started the Institute in 2020. Obviously immediately the mind is going to the pandemic, and at that time what we did was to create the first platform that was monitoring cyber incident against the healthcare sector with a specific angle, not only by, let's say, tracking and tracing the different cyber attacks, but as the ambassador was mentioning before, also highlighting what it means in terms of like a concrete impact, in terms of like harm to people and to society. So highlighting what it means at that time in terms of ambulances redirected, people that don't get the vaccines, and so on and so forth. Then we use the same capability at the outbreak of the Russian-Ukraine war. We began collecting and analyzing data on cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure and the harms to society, analyzing from disruption to psychological harm. At the Munich Cybersecurity Conference this year, we launched in February. We launched the third part of our tracers, which is the Cyber Peace Tracer, which tracks and analyzes cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns against a critical sector in our society. Other civil society organizations that are active both in, for example, development and humanitarian context. what we found recurring basically across the different tracers that we set up is indeed the prevalence of ransomware attacks, and considering the persistence of ransomware threat actors and the increasing harm that caused by ransomware operations worldwide, at the end of March, we decided to have a sort of like a threat focus type of analysis and type of work, which is the project that we are currently doing. Phase 1 is a global mapping of ransomware threat actors, their geographies, affiliation, and targets, providing basically evidence-based support to stronger multilateral actions. And then phase 2 will evaluate the state compliance with the UN cyber norms, judicial cooperation, and the misuse also of the technical infrastructure, paving the way for more accountability mechanisms. If you allow me still, let's say, five minutes, we would like to share with you the very first initial findings. And to do this, I'm joined by my colleague Nedelcho online, who will present the preliminary findings from our work. Nedelcho, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you, Francesca. It's a pleasure being here. And without further ado, I'll share my screen now.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to make sure you can see it. Yeah, it's all good.
Not yet, but I'm sure it will come soon. We still cannot see your screen, Nedelcho.
We can see your name, but not your screen.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh, wow. Otherwise, maybe you can start,
Yes, we may.
Through, yeah, exactly.
We may then start the transition towards the more kind of interactive part of the discussion. But I'm also looking at our colleagues in the back that are taking care of the tech. Whenever you are ready to show the screen, please just flag, and we will go back to Nedelcho. So, Chelsea, I'd like to come to you, if you don't mind. First of all, to thank you and Microsoft for convening this event, and for the leadership that Microsoft has been showcasing in really promoting multi-stakeholder discussions on this interesting and important topic. I see that perhaps the
Nedelcho, are you good to go?
screen issue has been resolved. But since we kind of see online like an infinite repetition of the same screen, while the technology is still being sorted, perhaps I come to you, Chelsea, with the first question, and then we can go back to Nedelcho, which is how has the kind of global ransomware threat evolved in recent years, and what trends are most concerning today? And this may be actually a very good introduction to then what Nedelcho is going to show.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for inviting me. So I think just briefly, Microsoft produces a digital defense report annually, usually in October of every year. And what we've seen in terms of year-over-year changes for ransomware is a whopping 275% change just in the last 12 months in terms of increase in use of ransomware. And there's really been two sort of accompanying trends that have gone with this ransomware uptick that we've seen. One is, while we've seen the 275% use of over the last 12 months, we've also gotten better as a collective industry at actually defending against ransomware. And so we've seen, in terms of quantitative numbers, a 300% decrease in the overarching amount of ransomware that has gotten to the encryption phase, so what I sort of call the lockout phase. And that's really significant because once you get there, you're really at the behest of the cyber criminals whom are using the ransomware. I think secondly, one other point I'll make too is that While we've seen some positive numbers to account for that really large increase in the use of ransomware, what we have not seen is that over 90% of successful ransomwares really attack unmanaged devices. And so these are very much your entities like hospitals or NGOs, which will continue to be targeted because they have access to fewer resources. And so really thinking about what is the collective capacity to address ransomware, we're really only as strong as our weakest link. And I think this is very true in the ransomware domain. So I think this is a little bit context, and I'd be happy to switch it over to the cyber peace team now, because those give you a little bit of numbers in terms of what we're seeing in the last 12 months with ransomware.
Thank you, Chelsea, for this initial introduction, at least into the threat landscape. Let's try to go back online to Nedelcha and see if we're now in a position to share your screen and see your slides.
I think it should work now.
Yes, I confirm we can see it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, just an introduction. My name is Nedelcha Mihajlov, and I'm a cyber threat analyst with the Cyber Peace Institute, with which I've been heavily involved in working with the incident tracer platforms. So, as Francesca mentioned, the project consists of 2 phases. So I'll skip this and I'll just go into the aims and objectives of the study. The aim is to compile a statistically representative data set on global ransomware activity, including the targets of ransomware attacks and the names and location countries of ransomware threat actors. And we had 2 objectives. The first is to create a database of threat actor profiles, including the name of the threat actor, associated ransomware and location country. And the second objective is to create a database of global ransomware incidents, including target location, target sector, and threat actor name. Now I just want to very briefly touch upon our research methodology, as it is a central part in the work of the analysis team. So we start with the analytical questions and key terminology. We create the data collection schemas for both the research into threat actors and incidents. We define the key sources, and then we document the limitations of our work, which mainly revolve around the usual constraints of open source research and the current limits of AI and LLM as we incorporate automation in every step. So the research was mainly guided by 4 analytical questions. Which threat actors have been responsible for the development, deployment, or facilitation of ransomware operations? Second, ransomware threat actors operate from, originate in, or are located in which countries or regions? Third, what open source indicators, so that would be personnel, linguistic patterns, technical infrastructure, contribute to the geographical attribution of ransomware threat actors? And finally, which locations and sectors have been most frequently targeted by ransomware attacks? Now, for data sources, we use data shared by partners or gathered through open source intelligence in both structured and unstructured format. And as we have incorporated all of our previous research from our cyber incident tracers, that could have impacted the results of the data collection. So, initial analysis and findings. We have analyzed information on around 300 threat actors. 52% of them remain unattributed to a specific geographic location. Of the attributed threat actors, 54% are linked to Russia, followed by 8% linked to Iran and 7% to China. In terms of the data collection on global ransomware incidents, we have collected information on 2,717 incidents conducted by 184 threat actors against organizations in 22 sectors across 90 countries. More than half of our attacks were attacks against organizations in the United States, and more than a third were attacks against the healthcare sector, followed by nonprofits and the ICT, with the top 3 most active threat actors in our database being Logbit, Black Cat, and Revel. And the following slides illustrate how one of our graph analysis tools helps us with data analysis and visualization. The first one is an analysis of all incidents pivoted around targeted countries. The second one is a visualization of our research into threat actors, which have been grouped and mapped to countries they are connected to. You will notice that some actors appear linked to several countries, either because members were arrested in multiple jurisdictions or because several open source indicators connect them to more than one country. And finally, the last 2 slides present a simplified dashboard view of our initial results. First one are the results of our analysis into the targets of ransomware attacks. And the second are the results into the analysis of the perpetrators of ransomware attacks. On the top right, you can see the distribution of threat actors, connections to geographic locations, and on the bottom left, you can see the distribution of threat actors among the global ransomware incidents database. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Nedelcio, for this inspiring presentation and being, representative of the research community. I'm always in favor of bringing more evidence and data-driven decision making to the table. So thank you so much to you and to the Cyber Peace Institute for this initiative. Really looking forward to see how it evolves. Before we go back now to the panelists and continue with our questions, I just wanted to remind colleagues online that you can start asking your questions if you want using the chat. We have Michael Karamian from Microsoft that is our great online moderator, and he will make sure that those questions reach me here in the room. Ambassador, I would like to come back to you and also to you, Julia, because you both alluded to or mentioned the fact that ransomware is not just a cyber criminal behavior, but it can escalate, it can reach the threshold of being a national security threat, or at the very least a national security concern for a variety of reasons. Would you mind elaborate on your perspective on this, please?
I think it's a really important way of framing the issue. I think cyber criminals flourished in a context where we thought about ransomware as a cybersecurity issue that our CISOs or our ICT teams needed to be conscious of. But as we've seen the ramifications from ransomware attack resonate and ripple through society, I think increasingly we have to be conscious that these are not confined, they're not a purely cyber incidents, these are whole of nation incidents which governments need to take much more seriously. I think the important part of that message is when an entity, an organisation or a business is attacked, it shouldn't be seen as just something that affects that business. Oftentimes the externalities of a ransomware attack are borne by the community, they're borne by the broader government. They're not just about the effect on that business. As I said before, if businesses or entities don't talk or share information about their attacks, that actually impedes the ability of their competitors or other people in the industry to protect themselves. So we need to start seeing ransomware as a much broader national threat to say, one, not only is it okay to talk about these types of attacks if they hit you, but actually we need you to do that to better protect our citizenry, to better protect our nation. So we're doing a lot in Australia to drive that behaviour, increasing our expectations on industry to report attacks, making clear that if you seek assistance from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, that is not a bad thing, that is not something to be ashamed of. Actually, it's a trusted government entity that can help you out. But when we see these attacks affecting society so broadly, it needs to be a whole of society response, not just something that's seen as a manageable, keep it within yourself, it only affects you sort of attitude. So it's taken us too long to get to this point, but now I think we're realising, because of the scale of the attacks, that this is a national security threat that requires national and global responses.
Thank you. Julia, I would like to come back to you as well, because in your remarks you also highlighted how to some degree what happened in Costa Rica was a wake-up call for many governments, and you alluded to the fact that even in El Salvador you've started to take proactive action and initiatives in with respect to ransomware. So would you mind elaborating a little bit how you see ransomware as a potential national security concern?
Thank you so much, Giacomo. And yes, following on the remark just delivered by Ambassador Dolin, first, we see an increased number of ransomware attacks targeting critical infrastructure. So this is very concerning. these attacks, as it was mentioned, go beyond financial motivations and represent a clear violation of what we have as the guideline of responsible state behavior. So while many of these attacks really fall on the realm of cybercrime, there is a growing evidence of state-linked ransomware operations that are conducted with certain tacit state tolerance. So we even seen cases where ransomware has been used not primarily for financial gain, but as a vector to conduct denial of service attacks that affect the availability of system at national scale. So this is linked with the case of Costa Rica, which was the first time that a national government was directly targeted in such way. So this attack disrupted essential public services and compromised the confidentiality of citizens' personal data. So beyond the first impact, it undermines the public trust in the state's ability to secure digital system, and this is especially worrisome as all governments are trying to increase how can digitalize public services. So and I mentioned this a little bit in my initial remarks, we also see linkages between ransomware and broader security concerns, particularly by the theft of cryptocurrency, as was mentioned by Ambassador Dowling. In some cases, these stolen assets have been reportedly being used to fund weapons of mass destruction programs and their delivery systems, and this is a direct threat to international peace and security. Also, the use of cryptocurrency complicates attribution and prosecution, making it more difficult to hold perpetrators accountable. So these are just some examples on how ransomware really intersects not only with national security, but also with broader international security architecture. And this evolving threat landscape demands close coordination between governments and multilateral institutions and other stakeholders, as it was mentioned by the previous speaker.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like to go back to Chelsea and Francesca, because both Microsoft and CPI, through different way, you collect a lot of data and you have visibility in a way that perhaps other organizations don't. So I would like to go back where we started, which was with the recognition of how ransomware is increasing, and this kind of the ransomware, the number of ransomware attacks has been growing significantly over the past 12 months. So based on the data that you have collected as a business, Chelsea, or as an organization that focuses on open source data with CPI, what can you share with us around the reasons behind why we've seen these numbers grow so much? Perhaps you can start, Chelsea, and then we go to Francesca.
Great, thank you. So I think there's really three trends, but I'll start with some sobering numbers. So at Microsoft, we track over 600 million cyber attacks daily. And if you break that down to a minute-by-minute basis, you're looking at somewhere around 415,000 attacks a minute. And that's just us as a company and what we have purview and visibility into. And so we're up against a pretty large mountain, right, in terms of cyber attacks. But I would say there's probably three things specific to ransomware that we're really seeing on the Microsoft side. One is what we call ransomware as a service. And this is essentially a product, right? So this does two things. It lowers the barrier of entry for cyber criminals who want to use these tools and techniques because it's easier, frankly. And then secondly, it allows scalability. So if it's easy to just download a software and click a button and then get money and paid out from it, you're going to be able to do it, right? So that's another reason why we see an uptick in the use of these technologies. And then secondly, right, the other thing I'll mention, and it's been mentioned by a couple of our panelists today, is the rise of cryptocurrency. And this is problematic for two reasons, right? It's easy to get paid for these ransomware attacks. And then secondly, it's really harder to track. And with anything with cybersecurity, if you can't assign accountability and transparency, it's really hard to really deter these attacks, right? If you can sort of hide behind your actions, and it's difficult to track. But I think finally, really the third and probably the most important factor in this issue is what we call safe havens. So these are geographic entities where you can actually base out of ransomware attacks against international victims, but they're really not held accountable at the legal and international level. And it's really difficult from an industry perspective to really target and sort of minimize these what I call safe haven opportunities for ransomware. And so this is an area where I would like to see, I think, more collective international cooperation across both the private sector and also governments. And that's something that I think we'll see more of in the future.
Thank you. Francesca.
Yeah, maybe I can. So I guess some of the points were already made, and maybe just on the first one, meaning the ease of access to tools and the rise of, let's say, ransomware as a service that all the previous speakers mentioned. Indeed, I would say potentially also in a way amplified and enhanced by artificial intelligence and emerging technology. So that this is definitely something that will impact the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and the sort of like widespread availability and relative anonymity of cryptocurrencies facilitate obviously the ransom payment, and obviously it's leveraged by perpetrator. The safe havens was mentioned. Maybe what I can add is something that was mentioned, I think, also before by Julian, and it's an excellent observation, which is in a way the expanding global digital footprint, especially with remote work, purely secure system and legacy infrastructure, provides more vulnerability for threat actors to exploit. But this means also that they are trying, let's say, to in a way optimize the way they work and use the same infrastructure basically for launching different type of criminal activities. So and this is why the second phase of the program will focus specifically on exploitable and exploited, I would say, infrastructure, which is something that is also, I mean, not so well, I would say, or not so much investigated. And an output of this mapping will be able to demonstrate that the same infrastructure basically is likely used, for example, for other crimes beyond ransomware. And allow me to mention two other factors that we see when it comes to the why, let's say, the increase. There is also a sort of like a thriving, what we call initial access broker markets, meaning that you have brokers that specialize in obtaining and selling access to compromised networks, often of high value organizations, which ransomware groups basically exploit to deploy their malware. So it's a sort of like cyber organized crime form of activity, but with a very specialized, let's say, professionals at the beginning, providing ransomware operators with the data that they need to then carry out the attack. And then let's not forget another very important point. We've seen ransomware groups shifting from, let's say, opportunistic attacks, so launching widespread attacks against, let's say, as many individuals as possible, to more strategically targeting critical infrastructure, like, for example, healthcare, education, even civil society, with limited cybersecurity resilience, but a high sensitivity to disruption. And that's interesting because, I was checking still the criminal profits hit record high because, according to Chainalysis, victim paid more than $1 billion of US dollars in 2023, facilitated through cryptocurrency, which means that still criminals are getting quite some profit out of it.
Thank you. If we have time at the end, I'd like to go back to this this kind of driver discussion, because in basic kind of criminal studies, that criminals need motives, need means, and need opportunities in order to perpetrate and their crime. And there is a lot of discussion around the means and how the means are evolving, whether it is technology, whether it is cryptocurrency, whether it is permissive regulatory regimes that allow them to or enable them to do what they do. But I don't think there is necessarily a lot of or enough focus on opportunities, which is what are the weaknesses of the system that they can then exploit in order to. And one could argue the regulatory one is probably a hybrid between both a means and an opportunity, but if we have time, I'd like to discuss more. But going back to a point that Chelsea mentioned around safe havens, I would like to come back to you, Brandon, about what mechanisms currently exist to hold states accountable when ransomware groups operate with impunity within their borders. So what can states do?
It's a tough one. We have an established norm on this issue that was agreed as part of the 11 Norms of Responsible State Behaviour, which essentially said states should take responsibility to prevent malicious cyber actors from operating with impunity in their territory, but we still see this happening quite commonly. We then look to, well, what international measures do we have that can help us address that issue? One is bilateral. We engage with several attacks that have been launched from Russian territory against Australia or partners in the region. We engage with the Russian government and we make clear that we expect action to be taken against these actors. Usually there is no response. So a big part of that problem is that we have a government that is not taking seriously and is in fact likely profiting from some of the criminal activities taking place from its jurisdiction. We've then used sanctions to try and target the people who are behind the attacks. These are a limited measure. They do have an impact. They do have a deterrent, but the problem of attribution is a challenge. And then sanctions, if a person does not have financial assets in your country, are always going to have limited effect. Law enforcement responses have to be part of the response when we do find cyber criminals in jurisdictions who will cooperate, ensuring the digital evidence is made available to support successful law enforcement and prosecution. And that's where the Budapest Convention, where the Cybercrime Convention will hopefully bring more states to take seriously legal measures to combat cyber criminals who may come across their jurisdiction. Finally, we consider that disruption measures have to be part of the solution. When you've exhausted all other avenues to achieve a law enforcement response, when you have safe havens where people are operating from with impunity, finding active disruption measures to take down infrastructure, to throw sand in the gears, to make life harder for these actors has to be an important part of the response. Again, challenging, time-consuming. Attribution can be a difficulty, but we have had success against groups like Lockbit, where there has been significant enough impacts on their infrastructure to disrupt their operations for some time. The Counter-Ransomware Initiative, I think, has been a really effective grouping that has brought countries together to talk about building up cooperation to combat ransomware. That's still a work in progress, but I think a much broader church of countries are coming together to take this seriously. So we're going in the right direction, but when you hear the sort of figures that Chelsea shared, there is a long way to go to seriously put a dent in this crime.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to you, Julia, to look at more at kind of the multilateral side of this equation. But before I do, I just wanted to share with perhaps Chelsea and Francesca an interesting question that came online, so you have the time to think about it while Julia gives us her multilateral perspective. And the question reads, is there any research on how blockchain deployment is correlated to the mitigation of cyber threats? If no, how do we promote this research topic? And if yes, what is the outcome? So anything that you can think of related to the use of blockchain in this context would be very, very useful. But now, Julia, coming back to you, what role do you think should the UN play, not only in establishing norms, but also potentially in establishing frameworks for state accountability in cyberspace?
Thank you so much, Giacomo. And as Ambassador Dowling just highlighted, at the UN, we have this framework for responsible state behavior that basically outlines expectations on how states should act in cyberspace, and includes voluntary, non-binding norms, reaffirmation of the applicability of international law, and also building. So one of the clearest principles is that critical infrastructure must be protected and respected and is effectively off limits. However, while the framework set expectation, the reality on the ground tells us a different story, as we see from the Cyber Peace Institute research. Data and reporting continue to show a rise in hostility and pervasive cyber activity, including ransomware attacks that often target the very infrastructure meant to be protected. So the UN should continue to play a central role in promoting the implementation of these norms, encouraging the state to take operational actions at the technical level to enhance compliance. And these include the advancement in cooperative measures such as information sharing, joint investigations, but also reinforcing norms that clearly outline unacceptable behaviors, especially those that undermine trust, security, and stability in cyberspace. So more broadly, international community must work together to disrupt the ransomware business model and build resilience. You see, national policies, laws, and technical capabilities are not enough to address what is inherently a transnational threat, and no country can tackle this challenge in isolation. And thus, we promote that we do this also through multilateral forums. So, yes, kind of rounding up, more international cooperation is needed, but it must be cooperation that is practical and action-oriented and focuses on disrupt, deter, and prepare, and it has more effective response mechanisms so they can leverage.
Thank you, Julia, for your perspective, and also to give Chelsea and Francesca a couple more minutes to think about this. I also thought I'd add, being at UNIDIR, I have the privilege of having seen and having witnessed how the UN discussions have evolved, and we're now getting to the point where the current open-ended working group is wrapping up its 5-year mandate, and we are about to enter a future permanent mechanism with some details already being agreed on and others still being up for negotiation. But it looks like that this new mechanism will have, at least potentially, the opportunity to really focus more on the implementation of all the existing commitments that are already in place. And if we accept that beyond all commitments, there has to be the political will to implement them, and if we take that as a given, because if there isn't, then there is nothing really, no practical measure can work without the political will and commitment to implement it. But if we take that political commitment as a given, then I think there are a number of issues where the UN and the multilateral approaches can really help. Whether it is, as Julia was mentioning, some states may not even be aware that their territory is being used as a safe, or as a kind of a staging ground for ransomware campaigns. Or some may be aware, but maybe don't have the means to do anything with it. Technological means, but also legal means, because maybe they don't have a national legislation that allows them to intervene. And all of these things, despite the fact that we're talking about ransomware and cybersecurity, which make them feel like new, they are not new in the UN system. There are many conventions that have been negotiated before that then have followed with practical instruments and measures that have been developed in order to help states implement them and comply with the commitments. So, perhaps there will be an opportunity to develop like a model law or a model legislation for those countries that need to adopt some sort of regulatory measures at the national level that would enable them to then intervene and disrupt a ransomware campaign emanating from their territory. These things, you need to have legal coverage to do certain things. If you want to share evidence with your neighbor, if you want to cooperate, these require very well-developed regulatory frameworks or cooperation mechanisms that would require a little bit of assistance in developing. And with that, I turn back to Francesca and Chelsea and ask if you had the chance to think about the topic of blockchain and whether or not you're aware of any work or any research that has been conducted to explore the extent to which it can be helpful in this context.
I can go next. Go.
Okay, great. So I'm not aware of the latest art around sort of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and blockchain research, but just one brief point I'll make is that cryptocurrencies are ultimately based on blockchain technology, right? And so if cryptocurrencies and financial transactions are actually processed through exchanges which have a know your customer requirement, this does enable law enforcement the tools to enable forensic capabilities, right? So very much a reverse engineering capability to ultimately look through and see if we can't pinpoint where the origin of the payment came from. And I'm sure there's like a lot more to sort of assess on that topic, but it is a interesting part of the technology block or the technology platform that can be used for both positive means, right, but also criminal means too. So good question. I'm looking forward to Francisca's points on this.
That's interesting because it's a topic close to my heart because it was like 2 jobs ago I left, let's say, when I was doing research on blockchain. So, I mean, provided that it's a little bit outdated information and I would need to, let's say, to look into that again. So there are a couple of aspects. One from, let's say, from a technical standpoint, I would say that I do see, and I remember, I mean, doing some research on how, for example, blockchain can be used as a sort of like, not, let's say, the black sheep when it comes to cybersecurity, but on the opposite. And there are some practical implementation areas. I'm thinking about like threat intel sharing, for example, that can be extremely beneficial when we think about cybersecurity. I'm thinking about identity and access management, for example, where obviously the decentralization of digital identities can help, for example, when it comes to decentralized security. So thanks to the distributed architecture and the consensus mechanisms, and obviously the fact that you have, I mean, the key strength of the blockchain resides basically in the immutable data ledger. I mean, obviously you can improve the audit trails and the data integrity. Again, outdated information, but I would suggest that there were a couple of things that came to my mind. ENISA, so the EU agency, did some interesting work back in before COVID, so in 2019 on distributed ledger technology and cybersecurity, and there is also a work done by the World Economic Forum on blockchain cybersecurity in 2020. So these are the only 2 that, I mean, came to my mind, but again, because my knowledge is a little bit outdated. Can I just mention one thing where I can see it's a very good question also, because I think it also helps us in thinking about, let's say, potential future direction. What I would be really interested in seeing is, for example, how to use blockchain for ransomware resistance and incident attribution. And one interesting aspect that is kind of like collateral is also how you can integrate blockchain with an AI for automated threat detection as well.
Thank you. And we may go back to the more general topic of which technologies exist out there that could help. But I'm also conscious of the time. And before I continue, we probably were a little bit too ambitious with the number of questions we have prepared. I'm conscious of the time that we have 12 minutes before we have to wrap up this interesting session. So I also wanted to make sure I give the opportunity to colleagues in the room. If there is anyone who would like to ask a question, I see one. If you can please reach for the microphone on your right and introduce yourself, please, before asking the question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for an excellent panel. My name is Vilde, and I think ransomware is such an interesting type of crime. And as a criminologist, I'll allow myself to say that it's maybe my favorite kind of crime, at least from an academic perspective. And I have a question for Julie and Brandon, who's tackling cybercrime from like a government sector, because I wrote my master thesis on ransomware, and one of the many interesting and unique aspects of ransomware is that it's, as far as I can tell, the only type of crime, or cybercrime is the only type of crime where the private sector is dominating, both on crime prevention but also handling the incident and dealing with the aftermath. So I was just wondering, coming from a government perspective, how in your respective countries, how are you dealing with that sort of cooperation with the government and the private sector? Thank you.
It's a really interesting question, and you're right. In cyber, so much of the front line is in the hands of the private sector, and in no other form of crime or attack type would we say, oh well, that's kind of completely a responsibility of the private sector, and whether they tell anyone about it is their business, and they're on their own to kind of assist you with that. So that does make a much more challenging environment. Some of the things that we've done in Australia are to try and, without using compulsion, but to try and build a far more collective response to these crime types. When we had two major cyber incidents affecting millions of Australians going back to 2022, the government came out and very publicly engaged with those companies, sent teams of police officers and cybersecurity experts from the government to sit in the headquarters of those companies and to provide assistance to launch the investigations in a very collaborative way. Now, those were very large-scale incidents, so that's a type of response you can use. But we have tried to create an environment where we normalise engaging with the government as soon as there is an incident, that sharing information with the government to aid in the response is not just a nice thing to do, but is actually the expected thing to do. We have introduced legislation that says if you as a private company engage with our cybersecurity centre, the information you share with them will not be used for regulatory purposes, so you can trust there's this safe space to engage and seek that assistance. And now we're introducing a mandatory ransomware payment reporting scheme. So in all these measures, we're trying to create an environment where it's not seen as purely something for a business or an entity to manage. It is seen as something that needs a collective response, and that active engagement with the government, with law enforcement, with our cybersecurity experts is a normal way of responding to these incidents. It'll take time, but I think it actually improves when that type of behaviour is modelled well by companies. Once some companies start to do this and it becomes a new norm that this is how you engage, that creates an environment where others are doing the same. So we're trying to make all these efforts to normalise that it becomes a collective response rather than just something that's dealt with in isolation.
Thank you. Julia, would you like to come in on this question?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, and I think this is very pertinent. I would like, to provide some insights from the Global South perspective. And I think this is very pertinent because there is often this idea that ransomware only targets large enterprises or companies that can afford to pay substantial ransom. But in reality, a small organization around the globe are affected. And the consequences for these or smaller organizations are often more severe. So on a national level, we have this kind of like multi-stakeholder cooperation. Of course, as a government, we have enacted laws on cybersecurity and very recently on data protection, because ransomware often, it's related with data theft. So we wanted to make sure that we have in place all these laws that also protect personal data and privacy. And then, of course, these linkages with private industry, law enforcement agencies. And of course, as a small nation, we leverage a lot cooperation that we can build through entities like the United Nations. We also have a lot of work with regional organizations, like, for example, OAS. So we kind of like pivot everything that it's been done in the international level that can help us. And then a lot, of course, we rely, as I was mentioned before, on a lot of bilateral cooperation, trying to learn for those states that have more advanced capabilities to fight this threat. But as we have, highlighted throughout the panel, is global. So it is in best interest of all, to have try to leverage that level of cooperation so we all can combat and counter ransomware.
Thank you. And actually, I would like to take this question and link it to the rest of the panel, because we did have in our list a question around successful models for public-private collaboration on cybersecurity that could potentially be scaled. So again, going back to you, Chelsea and Francesca, you have seen probably many different configurations of how the public and the private sector work together. What are some of the most successful stories that you've seen, or some of the models that you think could be used as an inspiration?
So I'll go ahead and start, but really liked your question from the audience, but I'll briefly say, so just earlier this month, Microsoft actually announced a pilot program with Europol to integrate our digital crimes investigators into their European Cybercrime Center in The Hague. And I think these sort of novel model public-private partnerships are an interesting thing to try out across different sectors, right? Because then you're marrying both the private sector expertise and sort of the front lines that we see in ransomware with the legal and investigatory powers of states and governments. And that's a very powerful tool. And I'd like to sort of see those models as applicable, be replicated across different environments. But it's a really great question, and I think more to be seen on if this model with Europol will scale and also be successful. But I think just willingness to try to partner between private sectors and governments is a really great attempt. So.
And maybe the other one that comes to mind is the ransomware task force, which I think see involved. I mean, it's a multi-stakeholder effort with participation from across government, industry, civil society, and I think it was like very well received, very well sustained, let's say, and so yeah. I think these are the ones that comes to mind, and maybe just to advocate with, with my civil society hat, I would say not only private sector and government should work together, but also including, I think, civil society organization can definitely bring an added value. I mean, there's one aspect which is something that I try to highlight in the panel. So documenting basically the impact that ultimately ransomware is having, as we said also, and as remarked by the previous panelists, as a societal threat, not just a technical one, or not just a business related one, but it can also be a sort of like, in a way, supporting sort of like thinking outside the box. And civil society has a sort of like unique capacity to propose, test, and propose also ethical frameworks, supporting victim-centered response protocols, reinforces the need for due diligence in digital infrastructure. So coupling it with, for example, what Brandon was mentioning before in terms of like the collaboration with law enforcement and the collaboration with the private sector, I think that also civil society can definitely play a role.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. We have just over 2 minutes before we need to wrap up this discussion. So I would like to do one final round to all our speakers and give you the chance, starting with you, Ambassador, to 30 seconds. What is the one key takeaway you would like the audience here in the room and online to bring back after this session?
I think working together on this issue, there's private sector responses to build resilience, there's threat intelligence sharing. Microsoft helped us as we tracked down the perpetrator behind the Medibank attack. This affects every nation at all levels. We've been too slow to come together and act collectively against it. There's no one lever. We need to pull all levers at once. So talking about this as a national policy issue in all your countries is crucial.
Thank you. Coming to you, Julia, online, your key takeaway.
Thank you, Giacomo, and thank you so much to all the panelists. This has been really enriching. As you said, we are at the UN, underway to establish a future permanent mechanism. So I think these are critical opportunities for all states regarding their size of capacity can share insights on ransomware, and we can decide some mechanisms within the UN to advance international cooperation and assistance to find ransomware together. Thank you.
Thank you. Francesca.
Actually, I was reflecting. It's one of the first panels where I'm super happy to hear very concrete, let's say, initiatives and good examples. So I would say my aspiration for the panel is to go out and say collaboration needs to be meaningful, not just tokenized. So collaboration is not just let's say a buzzword that we need to have there, but it needs to to make an impact. And then allow me to say one thing that I forgot to mention before, which I think it's important. We did not have time to dig into, but definitely the aspect of capacity building. I mean, don't take for granted that we are all on the same page. We got some very good examples from different areas of the world. We need to build the capacity, an inclusive, let's say, capacity building work stream across the different sectors and across the different geographies.
Thank you. Chelsea.
And then finally, I think to close this off, I'd like to sort of see how capacity building and skilling changes to tackle this problem. And I think it'll be an exciting next few years as we see creative uses of artificial intelligence tools to really counter ransomware. And I don't think that's just going to sit in the hands of big tech providers. So looking forward to seeing how our counter measures against ransomware will evolve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, all is left to do is to thank our speakers for sharing their experience and knowledge with us. Thank all of you in the audience here in person and online for participating. And again, thanks to Microsoft for bringing us together to discuss this very interesting topic. Thank you very much. Thanks.